G'day, Mixtape has come and, well, not really gone because the discourse around it has had quite the staying power. In another reality, the game would release, people would like or dislike it for various reasons, share their thoughts, and we'd all move on. So much arguing and gatekeeping has happened that it became hard to ignore. Maybe that says something about me and my presence online. Hopefully by the time this happens to another game, I can stay somewhat offline enough that I don't have to see a controversy like this. Looking at the various talking points, I found myself ready to wave a lot of them away, but later changed my mind and wanted to sit in thought about some of them. So get ready for some rambling on some of these topics from someone who just wants there to be good, proper discussion around video games. As I said in my video on IGN's mouse review, disagreements and everything are fine, just try to do it with some tact and a bit of respect. I think it's much more interesting when people articulate different thoughts rather than just having something like YouTube flooded with people who benefit from the outrage economy. Okay, so the high scoring reviews. Is there a conspiracy going on where publications were given goodies in exchange for good reviews? Did money actually change hands? Did anything dodgy happen at all? I don't think so. Trust me, I get the allure of pointing to something like GameSpot's infamous Kane and Lynch review and what Jeff Gerstmann had to say about the pressures of publishers giving marketing money to places that are also reviewing those games. I just find the discourse around Mixtape to be so inflammatory that I don't really want to entertain the idea without anything concrete existing. I'm not naive. I understand complaints about ethics and stuff because you have the advertising, the sending of deluxe or collector's editions, merch in general will get sent to some of these places. People are flown out to events and everything. I would hope it doesn't sway someone's opinion. Like, for example, me, if I was flown out by Capcom to some event, I feel like I still would have received Resident Evil Requiem how I did. But it's still something I keep in mind and am open to accepting that it's an issue if anyone has something more substantial to point at than a couple of reviews they personally disagree with. In a Total Biscuit interview, he said that he sees the receiving of items in any capacity as a bad thing, to the point where one publisher offered him a laptop to review their game with, which he turned down, but he still struggled with the idea that the offer alone had somewhat impacted his review. I'll link that interview in the description as it's an interesting thought. It's just an interesting interview in general as well, and it's something that's really stayed with me. For a long time now, I've treated companies like IGN and GameSpot as extensions of advertising that sometimes review things, and for me, I've never really treated them as that much of an authority. I go to these channels for trailers, occasionally news updates, and only sometimes to hear general opinions in between the odd review. For example, I really like hearing what Lucy James and Kurt Indovina have to say regarding the industry as a whole and their game recommendations. I wouldn't have heard about And Roger if not for Lucy talking about it. Despite me strongly disagreeing with some reviews and being very vocal about that in the past, I can't say any reviews come to mind that I view as actually sus. I find the Forza Horizon games very uninteresting these days, but looking at Luke Riley's review on IGN, I don't feel like he's feigning his interest in Horizon 6. His reviews always seem genuine. One possible reason for the high-scoring Mixtape reviews that I think about is some variation of those critics being closer to casual gamers. Let's first use me as an example when talking about how a more casual person might receive games. Here are some character action hack and slash games I've finished: God of War 2 and 3, Devil May Cry 3, 4 and 5, and Metal Gear Rising. I've also played but not finished titles like Ninja Gaiden 2, Reboot DMC, God Hand, and Darksiders. I'll happily tell you I had a lot of fun with all of those games, and I have way more positive praise than negative for the gameplay. Some might have been harder for me than others, but overall they all felt terrific to play and didn't cause much friction. Because I'm a casual when it comes to this genre though, I have not played beyond the highest available difficulty, which is usually some variation of normal, as higher ones tend to only become playable upon completion. I've never done a full second playthrough for these games, only now am I slowly doing that in Devil May Cry 5. I don't have a full understanding of each of these games, so while I sit there and tell you X game feels responsive and Y game has a combat system with lots of options, that's just me as a casual having fun without fully engaging in something deeper and striving for mastery of the gameplay systems. I could very well play a hack and slash game in the future that I say is really fucking good. This is a 9 out of 10. And then have someone with more experience in the genre scratch their head because maybe I'm having fun in a game that's actually a step backwards in design compared to its contemporaries. I just simply wouldn't know what I'm missing and see what's in front of me as novel and unique. That's how I look at some reviewers sometimes. Deathloop really exposed this idea for me. At first, I was quick to assume something malicious was going on with the crazy amount of praise it received and the 10 out of 10 reviews. Using Occam's razor instead of spreading conspiracy theories though points to those reviewers maybe being more casual when it comes to immersive sims. The downsides of Deathloop's design, which was obvious to people with some experience in the genre, seemed to be novel for the higher scoring reviewers. So whilst myself and other fans of the genre could immediately notice the hand-holding and lack of actual problem solving, those with less experience perhaps didn't notice, to the point that they've been successfully tricked into thinking they're solving a puzzle themselves. Like handing someone the controller for a fighting game without telling them settings for auto combos and blocks have been turned on. So maybe these reviewers see Mixtape as enough of a novelty and their list of played games is small enough that it becomes an experience that's new enough to stand out more than other games. A final point about reviewers potentially being more on the casual side is the combination of needing time to get the review itself out. At any point, a reviewer is given a deadline by the publication, or in the case of people who post reviews on their own channels, whether it be YouTube or a blog or something else, they're kind of at the mercy of the algorithm and trying to get content out on embargo day so as to not lose views to other people. I think a shorter playthrough could be a factor that increases enjoyment in a way, or rather it's the perception that makes them look at the game more favourably. I can totally see how someone trying to grind their way through a 100-hour long, only okay game might be much harsher on it if they're trying to pump out ridiculous amounts of playtime in a short window and then scrambling to get that review out, versus a shorter game not sticking around long enough to leave a bad taste in the reviewer's mouth, and said reviewer being happier with a game they can actually roll credits on. It's happened before where a reviewer will say they haven't rolled credits yet, but a deadline is a deadline. I think Mandalore Gaming is a fantastic reviewer. Well-timed humor, a deep understanding of the medium, and he puts a lot of care and time into his work. Under a tight deadline, I'm sure he could still deliver good stuff, but I think he's such a standard for me because he's able to set lots of time aside to sufficiently cover everything he wants to talk about in as clear a way as possible. Next up is the topic of Annapurna's billionaire owner, Megan Ellison. I wish people wouldn't get so sucked into online arguments that they fail to understand who is who and what the situation actually is, because you can easily find a slew of opinions where Megan is touted as the main developer of Mixtape, and thus the studio who made it is a billion-dollar studio pretending to be a small-time one. In a race to be the biggest cunt in the gaming community, there's a good number of losers that can't even keep proper track of the things they spend way too much time being mad at. Like this person thinking Anita Sarkeesian consulted on Mixtape because they've confused the marching orders from grifters against Mixtape with the marching orders from grifters against Slay the Spire 2. Then you've got claims that the whole project was entirely the idea of Megan, and because the idea of the game came from a billionaire, IGN was forced to give it a glowing review. And then there's this whole rabbit hole about how media corporations are appeasing her because they then have to appease her dad who owns whatever organizations. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, so I haven't looked into it fully. Yeah, Megan's story isn't a rags to riches or anything, but I'm also not opposed to rich people putting money into the arts field. It's sort of what paid for many composers, painters, and a lot more many years ago. I also lean towards this topic being mostly disingenuous because of the fact it was non-existent for the many games published by Annapurna in the past. What remains of Edith Finch, Outer Wilds, Kentucky Route Zero, and Neon White seem immune to the accusations that praise only came about because of connections to billionaires. And what about any games published by Annapurna that didn't score super high? Do we just assume the check for those reviews bounced? Was a rather low quality goodie bag for Sayonara Wild Hearts sent out and IGN and GameSpot felt slighted by that? So fuck rich people obviously, but also hooray for them kind of? Because without Annapurna, maybe Outer Wilds wouldn't have become the masterpiece we know today. It would have potentially remained an interesting university project. As for the dev team, yeah, Mixtape is an indie. For me, I use the term for studios that are actually self-publishing their games, or if they are receiving external funding, it's through something minor like grants. Plenty of places do that. I would still call a studio indie, even if they are receiving government grants. I think a lot of the language of having indie publishers, because it's made up of independent studios working collectively and things like that, kind of sounds like marketing. I don't really get the complaints regarding Mixtape's dev team, Beethoven and Dinosaur, not making a genuine indie game, because it's just arguing about word usage, and yet some people seem to treat it as if they've been misled into buying a game they didn't want, or that the team themselves have coerced them or something. It's really strange. All of that waffling that I'm doing though could just be thrown away entirely, because maybe all the praise was purely due to nostalgia bait successfully snagging a few bites. It's no secret that Mixtape uses an almost fairy tale-like 1990s setting as member berries. It's not enough to win me over, and yet I was instantly taken back to my childhood at times, like when you hear the characters yell "car" while skating downhill. Except for me, it was when a group of us would be playing cricket or just kicking a footy around. Sometimes those feelings do hit, and they hit hard. It doesn't hit hard enough for me to sing its praises, but I do understand how some reviewers might feel so impacted by these moments that it becomes a more memorable experience for them in the process. Hi-Fi Rush ended up being my game of the year in 2023, despite how many other brilliant games released. Mostly because of the feeling the game gave me overall, but especially because of the emotional connection I had to a particular scene I've spoken about in a previous video. Link for that in the description. If I had any actual viewership, they'd probably leave with how much I talk about it, but Parking Garage Rally Circuit's music invoking memories of listening to the soundtrack of the first Tony Hawk Pro Skater was powerful. It gave me goosebumps, made my hair stand up, made me smile and feel joy. Isn't that something worth celebrating? Like, call this sort of stuff nostalgia bait and that it's surface level and all that. But if you feel something joyous from it, is that not still a good thing? I've seen arguments that personal bias should be set aside when reviewing, and that any good reviewer should be able to evaluate if a work is good, regardless of their level of enjoyment. I feel like that's entering the territory of declaring reviews can be objective when it's meant to be a person's opinion, which is subjective. Next, is Mixtape a video game? A question I've tried to genuinely think about, but one I ultimately just don't see any value in discussing. It's a video game to me the same way visual novels are also video games, or tabletop simulator. If you need to define them further, we have genres for a reason. Etymology is important and all. I just don't think I'm ever going to be at a point where calling Mixtape a video game is going to cause such a disruption to the conversation I'm having with someone that they then need to spend time parsing my sentence in order to grasp what I'm talking about, because I didn't call Mixtape a semi-interactive audio-visual narrative instead. I think games can and should be anything. I just want to experience cool, sincerely made works. I think some people enjoy having this conversation, they have interest in it, and are putting forward their ideas politely. I just think other conversations that are trying to exclude Mixtape from being called a video game comes from this gatekeeping attitude, a desire to dismiss games that they see as different from what they personally enjoy, and maybe that's some sort of insecurity for the person or something. I don't really want to listen to someone whinge about a game that wasn't made to your exact tastes. I also can't help but find Mixtape getting dragged into this is because the popularity of the game hasn't yet outweighed the amount of criticism. I don't recall Dispatch going through the same discourse at all, despite being just as light on gameplay. Turn QTEs off for that game, which I personally did because their edition just didn't really do anything for me, and the only input required is hacking, basically. The dispatching of heroes and choices don't need you present. You can just let it all play out automatically. I booted both games up to see which one requires the least amount of input, and you know what I discovered? That it doesn't matter. I'm not saying that because I found something out that goes against whatever argument I was gonna make. I'm saying that because my initial argument in the first place is that it doesn't fucking matter. These are both video games. Is the absence of traditional gameplay elements or lack of fail states, even though they do actually exist in Mixtape, and lack of a challenge an issue for you? That's okay. These are still video games, just not video games for you. So, the game itself, after all this talk of defending it, do I like it as much as I imagine some will assume based on the majority of this video? Not really. It's cute, I really like the visuals, I like the music, I laughed a few times. I think the final button input at the end hits really hard. I just didn't really get much else out of it. I see the nostalgia and feelings the devs wanted to elicit as a sincere and purposefully driven goal. For me, it's just cheap and really surface level. I think having that be the main focus takes away from any proper exploration of the relationships that you could have had between these characters. You have various memories that are presented as short vignettes, and the writing as a whole is basically a short vignette as well when it comes to the dialogue between the characters and the story that you're watching unfold. Everyone is like an exaggerated caricature where enough dialogue is given to build a cohesive plot and understand who these characters are. It's just not one that gives much substance. I think the biggest thing that highlights that issue I have with the game is Cassandra's relationship with her dad. There's a good amount of history inferred, and unfortunately the overbearing parent that can't comprehend their own child having autonomy is familiar to me. What I really disliked about the story for this game is that the conflict between Cassandra and her dad could have been a singular focus for an entire story, but because the writing in general is surface level, it leads to the interactions we see between these two characters feeling like some sort of parody because of how abrupt it is. The history between them that you can learn and the things you do hear about Cassandra's life from her perspective and Stacy's is all good, but when it comes to the actual interactions we see between her and her dad, it amounts to two fucking scenes. One scene where the dad comes in and just says, "I am overbearing and you will do what I say," and then a later scene which is really cringe with how it's set up and just Cassandra's dialogue where her dad just flips on a dime and says, "You know what, I understand you and I will let you go and do your own thing." There's nothing in between. It doesn't feel earned. And when it comes to some of these high scoring reviews that talk about this game pushing the medium forward, I think about that and I go, man, if you just got baited by the nostalgia and it was the emotional reaction that you're feeling that makes you rate the game so highly, I totally get that. Like I said, I had that with Hi-Fi Rush. But then I think about the writing and I think to myself, there is no way any of this dialogue or any of these interactions are actually going to be used as case studies for anything other than how to write surface level only dialogue. But anyway, if I go into Cassandra's story more, I'll probably also have to start going into my own story and why it's relatable to me. And at that point, you'll all be charging me psychologist rates for having to listen to me. I think that's everything I wanted to cover for this video. If I was going to say more, I think I'd just be going over topics I've already covered in my IGN mouse video and the one where I talk about just accepting that a game isn't for you sometimes. So those will be linked if my insight is at all valuable and something you're after. I don't think my insight really is valuable, but a broken clock is still right twice a day, so maybe there's one or two things I've said in the past that's worth chewing on for a little bit. Until the next video, have a good one.